Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for part 2 of Crusader Kings 3 with our Legends of the Dead coverage. Previously, we covered the legitimacy system and how legend seeds help in making dynasties and family trees far more interesting compared to the base game, just like in Holy Fury. Now, I want to cover and speculate on diseases, how they compare to CK2, and whether or not they will be enough to spice up the mid to late game portion of CK3. Lastly, I will be covering some of the more significant changes coming with the Scythe update launching alongside the new expansion. Epidemics are a massive part of medieval history, and the lack of core gameplay mechanics centered around diseases like the bubonic plague have left a noticeable absence. With Legends of the Dead, outbreaks affect every county and have 3 degrees of severity: minor, major, and apocalyptic. Unlike CK2, there is an incredibly detailed disease tab for each county, tallying every character death. Additionally, I've noticed that there are many new plagues that were not featured previously, and while typhus and consumption are making their returns, there are several new additions to the roster. One of the coolest parts about this update is that each outbreak has a unique name based on various factors like specific character names, regions, or cultures. For example, the Kochuan, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, dancing plague seems to derive its name from a specific town in Iran if my Google searches are correct. Many of these new additions to CK3 almost remind me of Plague Inc. with how visceral some of the map changes are. For example, when you go into the map mode to view diseases and zoom out, you will see a sickly red viscera that spreads out and engulfs entire swaths of the map. Zooming in also provides more detail in terms of how well a province is doing, with completely grayed out regions being wiped out development-wise. It's almost like an airborne Viking invasion. Speaking of maps, spread speed is affected by a variety of factors. Buildings, such as hospices and burial sites, can help build up plague resistance. It may be worthwhile to sacrifice a building slot for a hospice if possible. While the effects are very circumstantial, plagues can have devastating consequences to counties if they get out of control. On top of the monthly developmental decline, they can also lower control and even reduce popular opinion, which could lead to interesting dynamics with vassals if you choose to go full Scrooge McDuck, which would be hilarious by the way, and completely ignore plagues altogether. I talked briefly about expanded courtier roles in the last video with bards and court musicians, but diseases also have expanded the importance of physicians. While the developers have not elaborated greatly on this, physicians can, similarly to marshals, control plagues to lower what I presume to be the spread rate of diseases. In contrast to CK2, CK3 places the decision to close the gates with the physician, whereas with CK2 it was a decision under the Intrigue tab. Something that the developers go on a great deal about are the disease types and how they have different effects, such as how measles specifically targets children and increases infant mortality rates, which would be a big deal if you were a new count or duke starting out with a rather small family. However, I find this specific way of selling new DLC mechanics to be puzzling at best, because this is not that different from how CK2 treated plagues with Reapers do. Unlike Legends, Reapers do solely focus on diseases for the most part, and this new DLC does not seem to be that intent on introducing new mechanics outside legitimacy, which is in of itself built off of several different concepts introduced by Holy Fury. While I am more hopeful for Legends, I don't think that we've really seen an expansion from CK3 that is almost entirely focused on revamping past content, and perhaps that is where the $20 price tag comes into play. While I love to bash Royal Court, it did bring several original mechanics paired with older features like artifacts. Tours and Tournaments introduced a new map feature in the form of activities, which has brought new life to the map, and all in all, I'm just feeling very uninspired by this approach. Speaking of tours and tournaments, something that I do like to see is bringing multiple different mechanics together to create new content. With Legends, this comes in the form of funerals. Funerals have been a long requested feature since CK2, and now they are finally making their debut. Players can access a new decision to host a funeral, which creates an activity prioritizing high-level temples that can grant extra piety as a reward. In the vein of Legends of the Dead, characters will reminisce about specific character trait interactions with opportunities for hooks. From the screenshots we have seen so far, I do wonder how complex the remembering specific details portion of the funeral will be. That said, not all funerals will be burials and depend on specific religious tenets, which I find to be very interesting. If you recall from the last DLC, the Zoroastrians did practice sky burials, so the vultures will also be in attendance, wink wink, if you can afford the cost to build a tower. Typically, I go straight from top to bottom when I cover dev diaries, but I wanted to save the most centralizing part of this update for last: the Black Death. Yersinia pestis, or more simply, the Plague, has many names, but in CK3 it is seeing a significant buff to its lethal capacity and its range on the map. The first big change with the Black Death for its CK3 debut is related to stress. With CK2, there were a few pop-ups that indicated the plague was coming, but the developers have indicated that they want players to truly feel the dread of what is about to transpire. This comes in the form of various precursor events that add stress to characters. With CK2, the plague definitely made its presence known, but most encounters typically followed the same formula. The plague arrives, you close the gates, and then wait things out. There were various dynamics involved when Corchers became infected with the plague, and certain food supply problems if the gates were closed for long enough, but any real term consequences were usually less dire than keeping the gates open, as having the Black Death modifier brought a ghastly -7 health point reduction to characters. In other words, this was a boomer culling for the older characters. As for when COVID, I mean the Black Death hits, there are a number of new actions players can take. Aside from building hospices and burial sites, players can now stock up counties beforehand with certain decisions. While the devs have indicated that this version of the plague is far more devastating, we haven't seen any actual modifiers in full detail. A valid concern I've seen some people raise about the new plagues is that health stacking, or collecting a series of buffs through various traits and decisions to make your character stronger, is still a very valid strategy. So, with that in mind, I'm interested to see if the upcoming modifiers will be strong enough to cancel out any min-maxing or cheese attempts. I also think that there will be interesting implications for how the mid-game plays out. I am very guilty of playing for a few generations and then creating a new character. But if the plague is impactful enough and there are enough genuine consequences to the map and changes to how I need to play in order to survive, then I think that the plague will be a miracle not just for me, but for others that struggle to get past the early game. Last, but certainly not least, I wanted to get into the patch notes. We have had quite the lengthy list of changes, but I thought that it would be more worthwhile to cover the impactful and more humorous changes with this update. To me, this update seems like a massive nerf to older people. Not only does it buff up the plague, but it is also bringing bolding into the equation. To put it in layman's terms, it's Jover. C'est fini. Certain characters have a boldness value only affecting male characters. As for why they added this to the update, I do not know, but as there is no Rogaine or Finasteride in the Middle Ages, it is well and truly over. A fairly substantial detail that I'm surprised the developers did not elaborate on previously was how in-depth burial sites are. The dev diaries made it seem like they were simple destinations for funerals and a way to decrease disease spread. However, the patch notes make it seem like you can create your own family mausoleum and even found a legend there. The base game is also getting a slew of new enhancements in the form of VFX changes. Altogether, it seems like the map will have a better sense of ambiance with the addition of fog, rain, smoke, snow, and other various little environmental effects that help with setting the stage. In the balance changes, we can also see that diseases overall have been made to be stronger and not just the plague. Whether or not this will be enough to take down certain characters remains to be seen. A central theme that I have noticed throughout the comments in my latest video and on the Paradox Plaza forums has been increasing negativity towards expansion creep. Now, what exactly do I mean by that? Expansion creep is a catch-all term to describe new features introduced by DLC that buff characters. These can come in a variety of forms, but for Legends it comes in the form of Legend Seeds, which have a myriad of positive boons. While I will wait to play the full game before I issue a full review, having seen some early footage from channels like One Proud Bavarian, it seems very easy to build up a dynasty with one character and have enough momentum to keep the ball rolling as long as you maintain powerful legends. In contrast, to play Devil's Advocate, OPB was playing as a very powerful Alfred the Great, but the idea of having strong centralizing mechanics that need to be consistently balanced around, especially for vanilla players, is very annoying to deal with. On the other hand, I think that it speaks to the intrinsic issue with how Paradox develops core mechanics. There seems to be a view that players need to be goaded into trying out new gameplay features with additional resources and powerful decisions that have big consequences like de jure drift. All of this is to say is that I am praying these new additions to the game have meaningful and thoughtful balance in regards to the core gameplay experience that CK3 offers. I don't want to trail on for too long, so this is going to be it for today's video. If you enjoyed watching this, please consider checking out the first part of my Legends of the Dead coverage where I tackle the new legitimacy system, legend seeds, and more. Additionally, let me know what you think of my new editing style so far and what types of videos, Paradox related or otherwise, you would like to see me cover next. Thanks for watching. Love you guys. Peace.